Darkroom in use. Once upon a time, anyone slightly interested in photography would have immediately understood the meaning behind this picture taken in 2008 by Michel Campeau. Today it needs explaining. To say that for a century and a half, photographs were developed in what were called darkrooms, places like this, void of light. With no sense of nostalgia, and with the coldness of what he called an expert in accidents, Campeau photographed these backroom kitchens where silver plate photography had become more sophisticated since its invention. The most striking thing about these pictures is that you see no photograph, no photographer, only objects and traces of rituals, the sense of which escapes us. A chemical, dried-up material world, with residues and stains abandoned by its inhabitants, leaving behind them these lines where one used to hang up photos to dry like laundry. Today, the world of these craftsman-like practices, as old as photography itself, is dead. And here's what caused it. The first prototype, from 1975, of the very first digital camera. The picture was no longer captured with the effect of light on chemical substances, but by an electronic sensor that sent signals onto a cassette. It took 23 seconds for the obtained data to be transferred by the magnetic tape to a TV screen. When Kodak received the results, its engineers were apparently told to abandon their research and put their prototype on the back burner. But it would be a mere reprieve. In 2008, in Chalon, like elsewhere, the last plants where Kodak still produced argentic film were demolished. It marked the end of a century and a half of inventions, processes, and cameras that had taken part in the evolution of photography since its beginnings. But it also marked the end of a type of photography that emphasized the shot, the instant, the decisive moment, the famous click-clack of Kodak ads.
Des photos fantastiques, un appareil unique, instamatique. Clic, clac, clic, clac, clic, clac. Merci, Kodak.
You press the button, we do the rest, said the old ad. From then on, it was this rest that became the most important, treating the image after the shot. Computers would give the freedom to modify at one's leisure forms, textures, framing, light, and color. Today's photographers use and abuse this freedom. American artist Kerry Skarbacka produces photographs of himself falling, in his living room, from a tree, in his shower, to show the instability of our place in the world. Work that is both existentialist philosophy and digital doctoring. These pictures are very real because it is the photographer who is really falling, but also fake, as they have been totally touched up on a computer to get rid of the harness and ropes that permit him to create the illusion of falling in all safety. Photographer Andreas Gursky, one of the pioneers of digital illusion, has taken this to another level, and for other ends. Pyongyang 1. Using several photos he had taken at the birthday ceremony of the former Korean dictator Kim Jong-il, Gursky combined various elements, not to create a new, improbable situation, but to amplify the nature of the event by eliminating all imperfections and smoothing over every detail. Seeking to create an image more real than reality, he has made the dictator's dream of total domination over this gathering of 80,000 people come true. Like the supreme leader, the digital photographer can rule the world. The event photographed by Gursky really took place. The urban landscapes by the photographer Beate Guccio, however, are entirely false. These are digital photomontages created from the collection of thousands of pictures of buildings and sites that she took down through the years with no preconceived idea. A genuine storeroom of spare parts, from which she drew to form her desolate views of the series S for Stadt, or city. We recognize the materials and forms, but it's impossible to attribute a function to these Lego-like architectural monsters. All we can affirm is a brutal monumentality, both absurd and familiar, as we get the sense of seeing it everywhere we go. Only the extreme focus of the buildings in the background suggests something is not quite right with this cityscape. The buildings are German. The overturned cars were photographed in Iraq during the First Gulf War. The silhouettes in the Balkans. It all composes an imaginary world, but incredibly close to the real-life disasters we witness today. In another series, LS, for Landschaft, or landscape, Beate Guccio faithfully applies the rules laid down by the master landscape artists. From a foreground which entices the viewer into the image, she uses trees, copses, and skies photographed across Germany to create a reasoned and idyllic landscape, the work of a genuine illusionist. Nothing allows us to detect the montage. That's the real novelty of digital. Not the montage itself, which has been practiced since the early days of photography. Doctoring and brushing up have become undetectable. From now on, no picture will ever be beyond suspicion. Photographers like the German Loretta Lux play with this, making the artifice apparent, like in this picture where she placed side by side two strangely similar girls photographed in a studio. She isn't looking for a realistic effect. The lighting doesn't match up, and the figures have no shadows, as if they were from another world. To accentuate the disturbing effect, Lux doctored the proportions of the heads. They are slightly bigger, not enough for us to notice immediately, but just enough to make them slightly troubling. In this picture, the setting is ostensibly split in two. The landscape looks as artificial as the disproportionate head of the child and the stiffness of her pose, similar to those in the portraits of royal children during the Renaissance. Painting is the reference here. A trained painter, Loretta Lux says that she uses digital like a paintbrush, only it is, according to her, not as dirty. Joking aside, these images seek to be something they're not, photographs that look like paintings of old. With Russian photographer Oleg Du, the artifice is even more evident. He claims this period of his work started with a blip in a brushing up application that fashion photographers use to erase the skin imperfections of models. Amazed by this accidental result, he decided to base his work on it. Using actual photos, he manipulates them in an obsessional way. Like a plastic surgeon with his scalpel, he cleans up faces, removes eyebrows and lashes, makes the eyes shine, smooths complexions, and reworks the traits until all trace of real life has gone. With their faked precision and faked light, these portraits resembled mutant computer-generated video game avatars. The total derealization causes us to doubt not only the reality the image depicts, but also the nature of the photograph itself. Some photographers have reacted against this digital fever and the lack of certainty by reviving the rudimentary techniques from the dawn of photography, when each image was captured from reality with great pains. 24 hours of exposure were needed for Vera Lutta to obtain this picture of the Great Pyramid of Giza, using the most primitive means that exist, the camera obscura, or pinhole camera, which has been around since antiquity. To make a pinhole camera, you take a closed box and pierce a hole in one end. When you place a lighted object in front of the pinhole, its image is projected onto the opposite inner wall of the chamber, only upside down. To make pictures like this, Vera Lutta uses large volumes, such as a container, which she turns into a huge pinhole camera. Inside, she places several sheets of photosensitive paper side by side and directly obtains large format negatives, 2.5 meters by 5.7 meters, like for this view of an open cast mine. There's no human presence in the picture, as it's too fleeting for a full day of exposure. All that remains is the inanimate world in all its glory, captured with no lenses and thus no deformation. A New York facade, Columbus Avenue, June 21st and 22nd, 1997. For each of her pictures, Vera Lutta gives the time of exposure in the title, giving the process as much importance as the result. A New York hotel room turned entirely into a pinhole camera by photographer Abelardo Morel. But contrary to Vera Lutta, Morel captures both the outside image projected into the room and the actual interior with its walls and furniture. He can then create a mixture of inside and out that is both poetic and ironic. The photographer has no hold over the outside image, which depends solely on the location of the room and its dimensions. But he can modify the internal features of his pinhole camera, like in this picture of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, in which the exterior facade of the building is projected onto the wall of an exhibition room. Morel moves the painting by De Chirico to create a play of balance and mise en abîme. The process is even more marked in the pictures obtained by Gabor Oss. Here, the pinhole camera is a volume in a building under construction, and the holes through which the light passes are small openings left in the concrete walls once the iron framework has been removed. The juxtaposed pinholes project onto the opposite wall the same cityscape, but from differing angles. Some pictures are captured in two exposures, enabling the photographer to obtain variations in color, a kind of experiment on the nature of light. Around 1840, French photographer Hippolyte Bayard was amazed by being able to capture exact imprints of real objects, flowers, feathers, fabrics, and lace, on paper soaked in chemicals. The pictures were in cyan blue, hence the name of the process, cyanotype. In 2008, Christian Marclay renewed it by unwinding audiocassette tape onto photosensitive paper, a homage to the old music support also put to the sword by digital. It was also by placing a wedding dress directly onto photosensitive paper that British photographer Adam Fuss produced this life-size picture called Medusa. The undulating white lines weren't part of the design. Fuss created them by filling the dress with live snakes. Nostalgia for old-style photos explains in large part the success of Lomo Society International, a community of enthusiasts who use cheap analog cameras. The lomography movement took its name from a camera manufactured in the former Soviet Union in the 1980s. The Lomo Society re-emphasizes the instant as an instinctive and raw act. Its motto is, "Don't think, just shoot." Photos like those by Frédéric Lebin, with their fog, blurring, poor framing and saturated colors, taken with bad quality plastic cameras, must be kept as they are. Brushing up is a definite no-no. Technical failure is part of the process. Accidents and defects are assumed, a reaction to the cold perfection of the digital era. At the opposite end of the scale, other photographers are inspired by the latest advances in technology and science. Under the pretext of denouncing what she calls genetic surveillance, American artist Heather Dewey Hagborg collects cigarette butts and chewing gum off the streets of New York and samples the DNA of their consumers. A computer program then analyzes gender, age, skin color, and eye color, enabling her to create stunning 3D portraits, or rather, digital photo sculptures. Images from another reality, invisible to the naked eye. The technique is still rudimentary, but in 30 years it could possibly be the norm. Tom Friedman has taken the opposite path. In this picture called Self-Portrait, he turned himself into a human barcode from a simple full-length photo. To understand how he did it, here's a digital photo of a painting by Delacroix. You isolate a vertical strip across the original image, but only one pixel across, the basic component of all digital images. You then stretch this strip horizontally, thus obtaining a surprising representation of the real matter hidden behind digital appearances. In the toing and froing between imaging and science, photographer Thomas Roof has taken as a starting point the equations of the physicist James Clerk Maxwell, who laid down the basic laws of electromagnetism in the late 19th century. Roof loaded the equations into a 3D computer software, which automatically generates sequences of cycles in movement. Roof only intervened at the end of the process, capturing these cycles from the screen and then blowing them up into large formats. In the 1920s, Man Ray and Moelinage produced ghostly still lifes. Stunning photograms made by placing objects directly onto photosensitive paper. Rouff has sought to rediscover the aesthetic, but without the restrictions and vagaries of the old process. On his computer, he created a virtual pinhole camera that is totally digital: the process, the objects, the materials, the light and the shade. It's a meticulous job of imitation and a paradoxical homage to photography. Where others use computers to create a virtual reality, Rouff uses his to recreate the illusion of an old photo. But digital images are more than purely aesthetic. In today's world, they also have a social role in communication and control. The omnipresence of surveillance cameras inspired Swiss-born photographer Jules Spinach's series, Surveillance Panorama. For 3 hours, 3 cameras in different locations take one picture every 4 seconds. From the 2,176 images obtained, the photographer recomposes one overall image, forming an exact reconstruction of space, but with a mixture of time. The final picture, here of Davos in Switzerland, both precise and muddled, gives a spectral feel to these large panoramas, which, through their dimensions, seek to rival the dioramas of old. Against this reality, decomposed by an excess of images, Spanish photographer Juan Fontcuberta sets another reality that only images compose. He calls his work Googleoramas, named after the internet search engine Google. Every picture is a mosaic made up of thousands of images that have no relation to the visual subject. They're assembled with the use of a photomosaic freeware, according to color and density, to create different zones for an overall image. Dark images for the palm trees against the light, bright images for the reflection of the sunlight on the sea. It's a play on the complete break between the meaning of an image and its physical reality. Even more ironic is the fact that to create this tropical paradise, Fontcuberta typed into Google the words tsunami, cataclysm, apocalypse, and natural disaster. The Last Supper. Keywords: top French chefs, Michelin Guide, 3 stars. Tears by Man Ray. A picture from the 1930s when you had to stick on real fake glycerol tears onto the model's face. A single image that Fontcuberta hides among the massed 10,000 images that make up this dialectic trompe-l'œil between the fragment and the whole, short-sightedness and long-sightedness. It's his contribution to today's debate between old and new, between pictures made of argentic dots and images made of pixels. Refusing to choose either way, he presents us with an image made of images. Of all the images since this one, View from the Window at Le Gras, almost 2 centuries old. A tribute to the first depiction of the real painted by light, the first ever photograph taken in 1827 by Nicéphore Niepce.